It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Gabby Blanchard. Gabriella, I believe, is her full name, but she prefers to be called Gabby. I want to congratulate you, first of all, for having your story published in Authority magazine. It's titled Strategies for Rebuilding Life After Trauma. I wonder if you'd mind to tell us a bit about your teen years.
My teen years. Oh yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Orange County. I spent my teenage years mostly in Orange County, California. Went to a private school, had a great family life. I was extremely social. I was captain of my cheerleading squad at one point. I think I mentioned in the article, but I had a strong kind of faith background. And when I was 13, I gave my life to Christ. And so, also in the mix of those teen years, I was heavily, involved in Bible studies and church activities as well outside of school. Was a dedicated student. So kind of those were kind of markers of my teen years. I didn't date a whole lot. I had like one high school sweetheart and maybe one kiss, in high school. So it was very, on the straight and narrow, so to speak.
Very limited. It sounds a little bit like a storybook, teens.
Yes. I would say yes, a very nice, picturesque, if you will, kind of teenage season of life. Sure.
And yet, a few years later, you were uh, engaged to be married, and
Mhm.
the first abusive event happened during your engagement. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I like to tell people I know I didn't get from 0 to 100, but I don't really remember when the physical abuse even started. I can't even pinpoint it, but I know that once I was engaged, and I was very young, so I was 18 when we met. We were married by 19, so I was engaged at 18. So I was still, you could count this in my teen years. Looking back, I can see how just young and impressionable I was. But we were on our way to an engagement gathering at my family's house, and we were driving in the car together. And I don't know what I said or what I did, but I kind of said something that obviously he took offense to, and we were, arguing. Ended up pulling over the car in the neighborhood, and I was like, "What's going on? What are you doing?" And gets out of the car, comes around to my side and kind of grabs my face and covers my mouth and shoves my head into the seat and screaming in my face. And obviously I can't talk, right? Because my mouth is being covered, and crying, and then him getting back in the car, like, pull yourself together, put your makeup back on, like we've got to, and then like right as we're pulling up to my family's house, well, it's like, I'm sorry, I love you. And then, and I'm just like in shock, trying to pull it together. If my family, we just got engaged, we have to go see our friends and family. And so that's like the first time that I can pinpoint him being physical, and it's very hard because then it's like followed by so much apology and, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that and never again. And, I'm the worst. And then you go through months of where maybe things are fine, or even weeks where things are, bliss. And so, yeah, that's kind of how the cycle starts.
The cycle started. I'm losing your picture here.
Oh,
There you are. Okay.
okay.
So, when looking back, I know hindsight is perfect. But at the time, why wasn't that a red flag, or why didn't you leave the relationship at that time?
Yeah, actually, I did try to actually. So I broke off the engagement, and I didn't touch on this in the article. Statistically, it can take up to 7 times of a woman trying to leave an abusive relationship before successfully doing it. Part of those things, and I've worked through, a lot of the why I think victims have this question even for themselves. And I know I questioned myself as well. Like, why didn't I leave? Why didn't, but at that point, when the light bulb, in those moments when that light bulb goes on, nobody would choose to be in an abusive relationship. At this point, you're already fallen in love with the person. And by the time the abuse starts, there's so many barriers in place to leave, right? And trauma bonds being just one to start. It's like going to war with somebody, but then the financial, aspect. At that point, they've stripped a lot of, like, isolated you. There can be financial issues, the fear of leaving, and them getting, carrying out on threats that they've made to you. So at that time, I did try to end it, but he came back again with months of pursuing me over the top, which now I know is a huge flag. And then once we were married and then it all started happening again, at that point, you truly feel trapped and out of options. And that's why when I got help through human options, that was a huge part in me even beginning to understand. I think society wonders, like, well, if it was that bad, why wouldn't women just leave? Like, I even had family members ask me, like, well, did you really think that you deserve to be treated this way? It was like, well, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Didn't
Yeah.
think I deserved to be treated that way. But, I started to look at myself as kind of weak. And then you're in such a place of disassociating from your reality to survive,
Yeah.
right? It's like you start to justify, you have the abusive person in your ear gaslighting you on top of, you're like, it's really not that bad. And you justify and compare maybe to other very severe abuse situations. And again, so many barriers once you're in it that make it so hard for people to get out. And that's why, places like Human Options made such an impact in my journey and helping me even have, you know, less shame for myself, right? Because I was thinking, well, I just am weak. I guess I wasn't strong enough. It's like, no, 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 no. Like the narrative, that's not the narrative.
Did you have anyone encouraging you to stay in the marriage? Like keeping the marriage together was the highest priority rather than your well-being?
It's a very good question. So I kept this very, very hidden. I never told anybody during the marriage about the abuse. And so, from that standpoint, and I think a lot of it had to do with kind of my faith and my own moral. I wanted to guard the relationship that's supposed to be valued at the highest level from anybody, influencing. I didn't want to paint my husband in a bad light if I knew I was going to stay. And I also believed that I needed to forgive, right? And I was going to look at myself and do my part to, look inward and say, okay, what can I change to make this better? But I will say that yes, within my faith-based community, and I would say a large percentage of these type of relationships thrive in religious communities because you have very traditional, gender roles being, pushed.
Yeah.
And so when I did decide to leave, I did have a very, like my church, and there was a large group of friends that, were like, you need to forgive your husband, you need to go back, you need to do couples counseling, which even that I learned at Human Options. Like you never do couples counseling in abuse situations. That never turns out well. And that was really gut wrenching for me. That was a whole separate trauma outside of the initial abuse was people either not believing me or telling me, believing him, because obviously he's not going to, own up to that. And then also just saying like, well, God, expects you to, forgive 70 times, 7 times. And, you're not trying hard enough. It's like, well, I've been trying for almost 7 years. And it's not about a woman trying hard enough. This is a power and control issue for a man that, will have that lifelong struggle. That's the reality.
In the Christian community, I think there tends to be such a misunderstanding of what love means and
Absolutely.
what commitment means and what marriage needs to be.
Yes.
And it's so influenced, as you mentioned, by the patriarchal system that seems to have been in place for so many centuries. It's hard
Right.
to disconnect ourselves from that.
Yes.
You found yourself trapped in a very abusive marriage with twin baby boys. Where did you find the courage to leave? I mean, that's awesome.
Thank you so much. I wish that I could say that I had this burst of strength that propelled me. But I think I speak for most, victims or survivors that it takes your circumstances becoming so dire to where you feel like I can't do this anymore, like hitting the most lowest rock bottom to where you're like, I have to get out. And I almost felt I was put in a position where I was forced. There's two pieces. Having my kids was a huge turning point for me. Typically abusive people like that. And again, learned a lot of this through Human Options, going through their personal empowerment program, which educates on domestic violence. I didn't realize that this is stereotypical for this type of person. But there's escalation in key moments, like big life moments, like marriage, like upon getting married, having babies. They want to buckle down and double down on the control. because of change. And so once I had the boys, things were really escalating. And I just could not, I had had a separate health struggle. And I thought, if I die, no one's going to know. And I'm leaving these two baby boys with him. And it terrified me. And it took him threatening my life at the end if I were to leave for me, the light bulb to go on. And even at that point, and this is what's so hard to explain for someone who's never experienced this, I was like Googling, like, am I really being abused? Because even just
Yeah,
like having to say I'm in an abusive thing is
yeah.
so hard to comprehend. That last year I didn't have a car, I didn't have credit cards. I mean, there were so many things just coming down around me. And so it really took me being like hitting rock bottom to go, I can't survive this anymore. Like my mental health, my physical health was crumbling. And I had these two little guys looking at me, and I wasn't going to raise them in that. And so it forced that. And I had this crazy, what I would say, God moment where I saw him walk to the door, and I had been praying about this friend who I know now she's in an abusive relationship. And so I hadn't talked to her in months, and I was like, I need a confirmation. Like, is this my moment to leave? He's going to work, and, and he's a police officer on top of it. I don't know if I touched on it in the article. So it just added a whole other layer.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I got that friend was like, are you doing okay? And I knew I was like, it was like the floodgates open, and I was like, I have to get out. The fear of staying had become worse than the fear of the unknown of leaving and rebuilding my life. And I think that's a lot of times what it takes for somebody to actually get out, and I'm lucky. I mean, there's other victims who it takes like a life, threatening experience or getting to the point of almost dying because of his physical abuse for them to also get out as well. So
Pain is a great motivator, isn't it? And also, so are children. When you think of the responsibility of these two little boys,
yes, absolutely.
wanting them to be raised with that model as a father model.
Absolutely. And I will say, like, from a compassion standpoint, so many women, like, I think there's judgment toward women too who have kids and stay, but there's so many threats around, well, you're not going to get the kids. I'm going to take the kids. You're never going to see these kids again. And there's a perception when you're in it of, I can protect the kids more by staying, actually, because then I can control sheltering them or, whatever it is. And so kind of breaks my heart too. Like, yes, it was a huge part of my motivator, but I also have so much compassion for women who, are in it for a long time, even with their kids,
Yes,
because they feel like there is no other way to protect them other than staying, which again brings me back to the community at Human Options. A huge part of being able to take those steps is knowing you have access to resources.
yes,
We have shelters. It's the leading cause of homelessness among women is leaving an abusive relationship. We provide shelters. We've got our hotline, next step housing, everything in place. And then a community of women and men who understand the dynamics, who can give you the tools to grieve through it, work through it, and be on that path to rebuilding your life in a healthy way that's free from violence. So important.
how did you connect with Human Options? How did you find them, or how did they find you?
Yeah. So when I first so the day that I left, I knew I knew I would need to call the police because he had threatened to have me kidnap or not kidnap, have me arrested for kidnapping if I left with the boys.
Right.
And I also knew that, and then had threatened to kill me. So when my mom had come over, rapidly packed up the car. I had two phones, again, power and control, left those behind so he couldn't track me. And I called Santa Ana PD and just kind of broke down the story and was like scared, like he's gonna come after me. And I'm terrified. And so I got an emergency protective order from there. But I remember, Human Option partners with our local law enforcement agencies. And so they'd given me a card for Human Options. And I was such a mess. I took the card. I'm like, okay. My family's like, she really needs help. Like, you need to reach out to Human Options. And so, and I didn't immediately, in that first it's survival mode. And I had these two 9-month-old babies. But then when the detectives on my that were investigating my case, again, really impressed. They brought it up like again and said, were you given the card for Human Options? And I said, I was. They're like, reach out to them. Like you have, like, if there's anything else you take from this, even if we can't, prosecute him or have enough for that, we believe you and reach out to Human Options. And so I did.
What a gift. What amazing.
Oh, it was honestly, it was, I could get emotional about it, but it was such an imperative and it's hugely impactful, empowering thing going through the PEP program alone. I think, I mean, it's like 12 weeks or 13 weeks long. You're in there for 2 hours ish with other women who are either still in their abusive relationship and assessing, what to do, or have come out of it. To sit in a room like that with someone facilitating it who's so compassionate, to realize that I'm not crazy, that, oh my gosh, that was abuse too. And this was abuse. Knowledge is power, right? We all know that saying, but it truly is so empowering. And then to have people next to you in this room going, I experienced that too. And then you realize, oh my gosh, the statistic is 1 in 4 experience this. Like, I'm not alone in this. There's shame around speaking about it because it's so painful, to share. But they're more often than not, if you're in a room of women with more than 5 people, at least one has experienced it in their lifetime. So it was the biggest blessing. And then I also got free counseling for a year. I had no money. And I was going through a really intense court battle at the time. So I was being given counseling, which I needed one-on-one, and just even practical tips of like grounding techniques and how to get through accounting 7 years of trauma in court in front of my family and him sitting right there. It was so hugely impactful. And so, from there, I just have a heart to give back to the organization, once I could financially and otherwise.
Well, how exciting that you're a success story.
Yeah, I thank God every day for that. Yes.
And that you have the heart to give back to an organization that gave so much to you. Did I understand that it was a police officer that was in charge of your case that introduced you to human options?
Yes, it was a police officer and then also the detectives on my case.
Detective. So, and your husband was a police officer?
Yes, but he was for a different county, so that worked out. And
Okay.
yes, and the police officers took it so seriously. And I think because of the training they had partnering with Human Options, I remember calling, I was telling somebody this the other day at Human Options, but I remember calling in to Santa Ana to like inquire about my case. And it was like the reception person was like, is this Gabby? Is this Gabriella? And I was like, yeah. They're like, everyone has been apprised of your case, so you can talk to anybody in our entire
Oh
department.
my gosh.
Yeah, and they were like, we want you to know that you're part of our family and he's not one of us. He doesn't represent us as a community. And that alone, I was just like, oh, a puddle, because that alone was so scary. That was a very scary aspect of, added layer to my situation.
Because they're such authority figures, and I hear the horror stories of policemen that support the police officer being abusive rather than supporting the abused person.
Mhm.
That's thrilling. It gave me goosebumps to hear that.
Yes,
You named 5 different steps to recovering your balance, and I'm sure this didn't happen overnight. It takes time
yes.
to recover from that kind of situation. What stands out to you as far as being just primally important as far as recovering from that kind of abuse?
Goodness. It's a good question. I know I laid out 5, but I think it's really a combination of all of it, right? I remember having, like, there were days, if I'm being honest, where I felt like I didn't know how I was still living, right? And if I didn't have my kids, and I know it's dark, maybe thing to say, I just didn't even want to anymore. Like, that's how dark of a place that I was, and where I felt like it took so much effort to get out of bed. And if I didn't have my kids to live for and to fight for, I I'm grateful that I had them for that reason. And so I think it's a combination of, and I listed a few of them, but I also, I was surrounded by a community, and Human Options was a huge part of that, but then also my family and my very close support system that was around me was a huge part. Like, having women, for me specific, I'll just say women, a community around you to lift you up when you feel like you can't go on is so important, because we're not meant to go through that level of grief by ourselves. Like, it's just isolation creates a whole other myriad of issues, and also time for myself to grieve. I think sometimes we put this pressure on ourselves, and I know women do, especially as mothers, that I need to get it together. Like I need to be ready to go and I need to get my head on right. But if we don't deal with the grief now, it's like holding that picture of like a ball underwater, right? Like a bouncy ball underwater. It's like you're trying to hold it down, it's sliding. Eventually it's going to pop up anyway. And so for myself, I was so grateful to have my family really taking care of us. I mean, I showed up on my mom's doorstep with two babies and no money, no car, no nothing. And I was so grateful to have a year or two where I was going through court where I just got to be with my babies. And there were moments I would cry, every day, and it was okay. And I was able to give myself the grace to like not come down hard on myself. And when you have great voices like from Human Options and other people saying, yeah, it's okay. You went through a lot. It's all right. Like this is not an easy process. So giving myself the chance to grieve. And then I also really think I'm a strong believer that finding even one thing to be thankful for and focusing on even like I have breath in my lungs. You know what? I don't know how I'm going to have a job and I have $500 in my account, but I'm alive and my kids are alive. Finding it's shifting the perspective if you can. And I know it's very hard in the depth of like really tough dealing with trauma to find even one or two things that you will choose to think on that you're thankful for helps in that resiliency piece because
Yeah.
you don't take anything for granted. And then honestly, there's a quote that I read early on in that first year, and it said, you're going to have to fight. And then you're going to have to learn to love the fight because you're never going to stop. And it can seem like kind of like a dark, ominous quote, but there is something about digging deep and you can't do it on your own. That's why I bring up the community. That's why I bring up the grief. But if you can find something to live for, like your kids or whatever it is, there is that part of you that has got to go, you know what? I'm going to fight now. Like I've been down and maybe whatever storm or trauma it is, but guess what? This isn't going to keep me down. And I'm going to prove whoever wrong or whatever it is. Like I'm going to dig deep and lean on whatever strength I can. For me, that was a huge part was my faith. And
Yes.
this isn't going to be the end of my story. And it doesn't have to be. When we have, yes, we have resources like Human Options. There's a community of survivors that even if they don't all speak, are around you. You'd be so surprised at how many women and men who have experienced it or been close to someone who has that will come around, rally around the community of survivors to say, yes, you can. You can fight. You can build a brand new life free from violence. There's hope. There's a beautiful future for you and your kids. And if you can just hold on to that and just take one day at a time, everything in life is a season and there is healing. You can get it. We live with the scars, but they're not gaping wounds anymore.
Right.
So I get passionate about it because again, I'm 6 or 7 years out and I'm living what I thought was impossible. And it
Yes.
can make me emotional. But I really, truly, when I got out of that, didn't think that, I'd ever be able to live in Orange County and provide for my kids. I didn't think any other guy would want me, which is a silly thing. I was like, I'm just gonna be alone forever. Like there's just so many things that you think when you're in these dark places of this is always gonna be so debilitating, the hurt, but it doesn't have to be the case.
I love your statement. This isn't going to be the end of my story. I mean, what an assertive
Yes.
that is. I love it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give another woman or man in an abusive relationship?
Hmm. That's a very good question. And it's funny the timing of it because I had a dear friend that I went to college with that is and texted me this morning who's in it and been in it for 10 years.
Oh
And
boy.
just was like, what do I do? And um, it's very hard to tell a victim or someone who's in it right now, like what to do. But
Yeah.
I would say to her or him, if this was your child or somebody else experiencing what you are, what would you tell them? Right? And
Yeah.
if it's if and let them kind of come up with that on their own. Because a lot of times as a victim, you're thinking, well, I can take this. But if we were to think of somebody else experiencing it, it would be like, oh my gosh, leave. This isn't okay. You deserve better. A lot of times you've been so beaten down, you don't even know the line of your perception is so off, and you almost start to think like, well, maybe I deserve it, or I don't. deserve anything better than this. Like, unfortunately, psychologically, you can think that. So my question would be, and this is what I said to my friend this morning, like, if this was your daughter, would you want her to go through this and experience this pain? And what would your advice be to her? And then also, it would be my other second thing would be the encouragement that there is hope, that there can be safety. There are options. It feels like there's none. When you're in it, you don't see a way out. Like, there's so many barriers, financial, emotional, this fear for your own life and safety, losing your kids. There are options. Explore those. Find a place like Human Options in your area. Figure out safety plan. Come up with a plan and be wise on how to get out. And then, if you can be resilient, it's hard. You want to give grace too, because it can take, like I said, up to 7 times for a woman to truly cut the tie and really get freedom and get out. But that would be my encouragement. Reach out to local places, even if you're just inquiring and want to know, even if it's like I was doing, like quizzing, like, am I in an abusive relationship? Reach out to people who, and explore that a little bit. And then also pretend it's not you, pretend it's somebody else and ask what you would want for that person. And then you are strong enough to do it. You can do it. You're going to be okay. Like, that would be it. Like, you can do this. I know it feels impossible, but you can, and you can have a beautiful life that's full of peace and joy that you didn't think was possible. You can have it. So.
Is Human Options a local organization or is it national?
Yeah, so it's actually local to Orange County. I think we would love for it to be national, though I'm on the board now for it. And we have some great visionaries and a lot of passionate people about the cause who would love to take it on a national scale. And even talking to the CEO this morning, because that friend lives out of state, and I said, "Do you know any organizations out of state?" She's like, "I don't, but there's this domestic violence coalition of survivors, and there's places they can do resources." So, I think long-term vision we would love to go national, and I could think it could just impact. I mean, I'm just one life of like thousands that go through our services. And so I know I'm not the only amazing story, and I know the impact firsthand of what it makes, and it's so needed. And even just training the police officers, right?
Yes,
Like, you touched on, like, oh, some of these, police officers support other officers. Sometimes it's that they don't understand it either. They're
right.
looking at a battered woman going, "You don't want to file charges?"
Yeah,
It's so hard, and I get it. It is hard to understand. So when they even get training, it's even, again, it's hoping that the goal is to change society's understanding and perception of the issue
yes.
by, changing it.
Maybe you will be the woman to lead it to the national field.
I would love that. It's I don't know how, but I'm here. I always, I have a heart for it. And that's why I'm so involved now in the organization the way that I am.
I am so grateful that you had the grittiness to share your story and and the grittiness to set the goal of healing for yourself as well as for your children and now for other people that you certainly have the authority to speak to.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I appreciate the time you shared with me this morning. If you would be comfortable, I would love to speak to you for a minute afterwards.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Okay, let me stop the recording.
Okay.
I have to find it first of all, just a minute.
Okay.
Okay.